Today on the podcast, I'm super excited to have Aaron Seaholm. Aaron is a vice president of customer success and operations with a company called Property Meld. This came out of a conversation that he and I had been having. One of my kind of mantras with startups is you really focus on either product or sales to begin with. And I think what Aaron was challenging me on was, when do you start talking about customer? And I think it made a really interesting conversation. We talk about, kind of the gradation of when do you start to invest in the customer, when do you have support, when do you have, what type of implementations make sense, and then really the customer success component of it going forward. So I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do too. Aaron, welcome to the podcast. It's not in the Treehouse today. I'm in my parents' basement, or actually not in their basement, in their house. My mom has promised me that she wouldn't come in here and ask me to clean my room. But otherwise, welcome to the podcast, Aaron.
Well, it's great. It's great to be on board. I'm sorry I missed the Treehouse, but the basement thing sounds pretty on par based on previous interactions.
53-year-old guy in his basement, in his parents' basement. Doesn't get any better. Mom, just leave me alone. I'm talking to my friends.
That's awesome.
Well, good. So I want to set this up a little bit. You and I have known each other for a while, and I think you've heard my pitch about startups really focusing on product and service. And I think you were like, dude, just listen to me. Like, when do you start paying attention to the customer? Yes. And so I think out of that conversation, which is totally legit, this podcast was born. So I think that's the pretense to this. I think really listeners should get some idea of kind of what to expect as you kind of build your organization, how to kind of phase layering in the customer and really providing more and more support over time. But before we do that, let's just start with a little bit of background, because your professional journey to Property Meld is pretty interesting. You've had a bunch of different experiences. And so maybe even go back to what did you do in college before you even got to kind of a professional gig?
Is that kind of a nice way of saying you've bounced around a lot and didn't really do what
I didn't say anything, Aaron.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Just do it, man.
So, no, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you, Todd. Hopefully I've got some good nuggets along the way. So I started out chasing a dream to play Division I baseball all the way to South Texas. So about as far away from Billings, Montana as you could get and still be in the U.S., as my mom still reminds me to this day. She did the other day. Anyway, I went down to South Texas, got to play D1 baseball, kind of a dream come true. I was chasing an engineering degree, mechanical engineering. I realized in the first pitch that went by me about 94 from a first round draft pick, eventual Major League Baseball player, that engineering the library was going to be had a lot better shot to make a career out of that than in baseball. So
what about the curveball? Could you hit that?
Curveball? No, couldn't hit the curveball. I could hit an 82 to 84 mile an hour fastball if it was about belt high. So that's where I made my money in junior college in Kansas. Yeah. So anyway, got done with school, went to work for Honeywell Aerospace. I had loved, airplanes, all things aviation since I was a kid, flew model airplanes. So really started off as kind of a hardcore engineering analyst, sitting in front of the computer screen all day. Thought that was going to be my life forever. Did it for 7 years, and then realized that my social skills which were bad to start with, were getting worse. I was missing, so in baseball, I had been a team captain, and I was finding myself drawn to these leadership roles outside of work. So eventually started working towards that leadership management role. And the first one I got was half electrical engineers, half software engineers, which I'm mechanical. I have no idea what these folks do, but it was great because it forced me to really learn how to lead people, because I couldn't just jump in and be like, hey, Todd, let me do that for you, because I literally could not do their jobs. Yeah. So I had to really learn how to do that. And that was kind of my first step into software. My wife and I, my wife's from South Dakota, I'm from Montana, we decided that we really wanted to raise kids closer to grandmas and grandpas and cousins. So we made the decision, which looking back seemed like a really kind of fast, off the cuff. I don't know why we did it, but it was meant to be So she left, moved in August of 2010 to Rapid City. I followed later, got a job with Northrop Grumman as a manager of software development, and that started an 11-year journey of software and IT and technical work. And, you know, I think in hindsight, putting the family first for that move and then eventually landing at Property Meld, which was another sort of family first, was kind of an important thing for me. And, entrepreneurs out there, having watched a little bit now on the startup side, there's a lot of sacrifice that goes into it, but trying to stay balanced, right? I don't know if harmony is probably a better word between work and the startup and the job is super important. So, all that to say, I was always kind of drawn to like these internal startup kinds of things, like new projects or new development, or hey, we're going to build this new application. You want to join the team? Yes, let's go. So I was always kind of drawn to those new startup type roles, and I think that sort of shaped eventually me getting the courage to like jump to a smaller organization like Property Meld, because I really like those things. Like if it's like, here you go, it's all done, it's all built, go ahead and run it. It was like, nah, no thanks. But if you got to go figure it out, design it, build it, test it, roll it out, get people to use it, that was always something that was really interesting to me. So been with Property Meld now for 3 years and have loved every second of it. It's hard, but it has been a tremendous learning experience to build kind of large companies and then a small company where your impact is just exponential. But there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of things to work on. So there you go.
Well, a couple of things I think is kind of funny. So you and I accidentally knew each other through Northrop Grumman and Concur, which I thought was kind of funny. We didn't even know that we lived in the same city.
Yes.
And I think you were on another call with my brother, which is weird too. And then over time we were like, hey, we live in the same town. We should talk to each other. So that's kind of a small world thing that our two kind of companies collided earlier in our career. And so that's kind of fun. The other part I think is kind of funny is you've gone from like rocket science to kind of leaky faucets. And I'm not sure that's a step in the right direction on the excitement scale, or maybe it is. Maybe you're like saying, hey, man, rocket science, that's kind of boring. Like property maintenance, like there's some stuff to that, which is true.
Doesn't sound on the surface, but I joke with Ray all the time. I'm like, bombers and missiles we've been doing for 60, 70 years, single family property maintenance, like 10 to 15
That's
max.
the attitude. I love that.
So, that stuff's all figured out. No big deal. This stuff, it's like we're reinventing all the time. So
that's good. So why don't we go from that? Like, what do you think from, especially from a corporate environment where, it's a large global organization with a lot of complexity, what translates well from that experience and bringing it to, startups and specifically Property Meld? Because I do think that you have a lot of skills that you learned in kind of a corporate America setting. You have to maybe recalibrate, but I do think they're super transferable. So like, what would you say are some of the biggest ones that you think have served you well over that time?
I kind of going back to that initial manager role, I think the people leadership piece, I got some tremendous mentors over the year that really like emphasized the people development, people leadership, motivating teams. I think that translates well if you've got, I think I had 160 people when I left Northrop Grumman. Now I'm at probably a tenth of that, right? So, but your people really have to trust you first and foremost. Like, does this person know what they're talking about? Do they care about me? Do they want what's best for me? Are they willing to push and get the best out of me, right? So those types of things I think are very transferable. I think probably execution, like just being able to lay out a plan, go make it happen, right? That translates to, again, if you're lots of projects or one big one for the organization, right? So just being able to sort of spec out size, plan, put the team together, go execute and get stuff done is really important. And then the other one, it's probably kind of understanding systems, and the systems thinking is what they really called it at Northrop Grumman, of like being able to understand all the people, process, technology parts of that system, right? And not just a system like, a computer system, like an
Right.
organization, right? There's
Yep.
people, process, technology, all those things play together into what do you put in and what do you get out, and what are the metrics and what are the important things to pay attention to. So I think those things have translated pretty well. And the ability, the other thing, I got some good guidance of don't stay in any job too long. Every 2 or 3 years, go take on something new and learn it. So being able to adapt and learn fast is another thing too that I had some really good coaching on early at those large organizations. So while I was at the same company for a long time, I only did the same job for probably 2 or 3 years, whether that was a progression up through, a promotion or a lateral move or just going to different parts of the organization to go help and learn was super helpful.
Yeah.
So I think those, again, people leadership, systems thinking, the ability to go execute and get stuff done, and then being able to just learn fast, lean in, know that you're not going to know everything when you start rolling. You just got to fake it till you make it, I think, is one of yours that I've borrowed and adopted, right? It's like, what's customer success, Todd? I appreciate you hooking me up with this
I'm
company,
just
but
looking to look up a little
what?
quickly.
Here, go watch these videos and read this book. You'll be fine.
I think
So,
that what a lot of this though is I think like execution is king, right? Like I mean, when
yeah,
you think about people and you think about systems thinking, all of those lead to better execution. So, and I don't,
yeah,
I think just to reinforce your point, I don't care if you're in a large organization that has a lot of complexity, or you're in a super small organization where like being nimble and delivering on what you say you're going to do, that's where we get paid. That's where
yeah,
we get paid.
yeah, for
And so
sure.
the complexity of that may be different in different environments. The trade-offs may be different, but it usually requires people. It usually requires process. There's usually capital or some resources that need to be expended.
Yeah,
And the quicker and the more predictable you can do that, the better.
yeah.
Flip the other side of that coin. What was more difficult to kind of transition to, right? I mean, I think those are ones that leverage and you can see those being applied to every place that you ever go. When you're going from a large organization that's got kind of a north arrow, what are some of the things that maybe make it harder to execute that you had to basically learn and adapt to?
I think it was just the scale and number of resources, right? When you have an organization, let's say 160 people, $100 million budget, right? There's some level of there's some level of margin sort of built into that, right? If you lose a person off a 20-person team, you're probably still going to be able to sort of absorb that with the remaining team members. If you have a 3-person team and you're down a person and that person was critical to the execution and output, that's a huge difference. So I think one, the hiring, like getting the people right with every early hire is super critical. And it took me a little bit to learn that, right? In a large organization, you got super well defined roles, right? You got processes, you got whole teams of people that help you recruit and go get and kind of, hire too. So I think hiring was such an important thing that I didn't focus enough on early. Had some people that really kind of slowed us down, kind of hurt the culture, just caused a lot of impact. I think the other thing for me too was the ambiguity piece of coming in of like at Northrop, there was hundreds and hundreds of pages of processes and policies and procedures. And like, you want to know how to do this, go search command media. And there's probably an article 2 or 3 to tell you how to go do it. Right. When you get to a smaller organization, it's kind of your job to come figure that out a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
what is the process? What does this mean? And probably one I still struggle with to this day is like, is now the right time, right? Is this the priority? I know these things make sense. I've done all the research and know all that what the book says, but is now the right time to go take that one on versus this one, right? And what's the horizon? Is 3-year strategies, at a large, that's too long, right? It's like, what are we doing this 12 months? Maybe we're getting to the point where it's 18 months. It's definitely not 3 years, right? So just really like picking what's the prioritization, what is the 1 or 2 things that we got to go attack right now is something I constantly like going through my head. And I know we talk a lot about, and I appreciate your perspective on that because, I know those things are important at a large organization or like a big group of people. Don't think they're important now, but what is the right time, right? You don't want to get behind the curve too much because it gets really hard to catch back up, right? So being a little early on things, as long as it's drive into the right metrics and KPIs that we're trying to move at the company level and understanding that relationship. But it's just easy to fall into so many, Ray talked about infinite work when he interviewed me. Like there's 1,000 things you could go do, right? Like what are the things that I need to be doing today at this hour? And again, getting really tight. I'm just, where do I expend my energy? Where do I have my team expend their energy? How do I not burn them out? Because we're moving really fast and I don't want to change too much too fast and lose them either, right? So I think the pace and just when do I do what when is still something
So
that's
what I
been
hear from you
harder.
a little bit is just it's focus, right? You got a number of things to do. You've only got capacity and resources to do one or two.
Yeah.
How do you figure out what those things are, and how do you execute well with the teams you got so that you have the impact you want? And it's not always clear. And I
Yeah.
think in startups, there's a lot of things that could be number one priorities, and I think you're constantly trying to figure out, what's the investment versus the return at this point in time. And so I don't think
Yeah.
that's easy. You do have kind of a clarifying maybe saying that you use. And so maybe you want to talk about that a little bit because I do think that you use that term internally to basically help create focus and say, and it may not always be the case where that's the most important thing, but a lot of times it could be.
You mean my catchphrases?
I
Like I like to
do
type.
mean your catchphrases.
So I think is this the alligator closest to the boat? It's one that comes up all the time. I use with my team. It's been kind of funny to hear them say it though too, but I think it's just it's the right mindset of, is this alligator going to reach up and eat me today if I don't address it, right? Or is I know it's swimming around out there somewhere. It's maybe next quarters or 2 quarters down the road problem. But that's a good one that my team seems to repeat because I think it's valuable. So is this the biggest problem right now, this quarter, right? Really shortening that time horizon, thinking about the focus, like you said, of, is this the one that's going to eat my lunch today, right? And really eat me,
I don't
maybe
think this
not
is
just my
just your
lunch.
employees. I think your kids say this at home
Oh,
about what's the alligator closest to the boat. So I don't know where it
awesome.
originated, but like I think you've
Yeah.
indoctrinated a lot of people and you're on a path. So
Well,
well
thanks. I
done. Just
appreciate
so
that.
you know.
That's my
Yeah,
goal, is to
yeah, that's good.
spread
Yeah,
the
spread the joy.
catchphrases.
Yeah. So maybe we should go backwards a little bit. Like I didn't really do much of a setup on kind of what property meld does, and so I know all of this from a startup standpoint is kind of generic, meaning like you're managing people and processes and
Sure.
priorities. But maybe give me a little bit about what property meld does, and then just talk a little bit about like the customer, and then a little bit about the complexity. You joked a little bit about talking about rocket science to where we've been doing this for a long time versus property maintenance really hasn't been. It's something that's kind of been evolving and it's being figured out. And you weren't joking. I think
Yeah.
that lots of people are trying to like work on this problem, and Property Meld's got an amazing focus on it. But maybe just give
Yeah.
me more context on that.
Yeah. So our customers are property management companies, right? So let's say I'm a landlord that has, anywhere from, let's say, 10 units to many thousands of units. But if I have a house, right, a single family resident, that is really where we started. Was we didn't start out going into multifamily, which is apartment complexes, communities, right? So the single family residential space kind of grew out of the 2008 sort of collapse of the housing market, right? So that if you think back when the interest rates, or, all, not interest rates, but all the loans collapsed, all that happened, it flooded the market with all these single family houses, right? So, wise entrepreneurs said, hey, let's grab up these residential units and start to rent them because everybody's underwater, the banks all own them, prices got down. So really, 2008, my mountain math, as Ray calls it, cowboy math, right? It's not that many years since that happened. So
Yeah.
why is that unique or different? Because those single family residentials are not super tightly packed. right? You think about even a medium-sized apartment community may have 100, 150, 200 units in a block, right? So having somebody on site going up to all these units, all the ACs are the same, everything's pretty much the same, right? To one house maybe over here, one house is 45 miles this way. Everything is different in them. The heaters, everything is unique and different. The owners all have unique, um, limits on how much you can spend and communication strategies. So it was this distributed, much harder sort of problem to take on than had been in the multifamily kind of apartment space. So Ray and David started the company, and really around that, David was renting a house in Albuquerque, had this really horrible experience.
Yeah.
Ray and David got together. Ray had something similar and said, "Hey, I think this is a juicy problem that we can go tackle and solve, right? There's a good job to be done." And I think to their credit, there's a lot of things they've done amazingly smart, but staying laser focused on maintenance, right? And that's, we don't do leasing. We don't do that. I mean, we get up every morning thinking about property maintenance, which is amazing, right? But it took that level of focus, and coming up on 10 years, I think, now as an organization, as a company, right? But it is a hard problem because there's so many people involved too, right? I talk about the complexity of maintenance because you have a resident, you have a property management company, you have a property owner, you have, the HVAC tech, potentially, vendors, you have, maybe I have internal technicians, I have my own handyman or whatever. So there's just a lot of communication, coordination, scheduling that has to happen to make all this work in a timely manner, right? So it's, it sounds like it's not that complicated, but then you start peeling back and just all those network effects, the challenges of being across town. Do I have the right parts? Do I even know what's in that property? Do I even know if a leaky roof is a leaky roof or something, that sprung a leak in the attic, an AC unit, or, you know what I mean? So I think all those things make it complicated, and the innovation that we've been able to bring to that is pretty awesome, and we continue to do that to try to separate ourselves. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, but property management companies, it's all about property maintenance. We started with single families, we're starting to get more and more multifamily, smaller apartments, just more units in a single property.
Okay. Well, it's good. So I think that's been a good job of kind of setting up, kind of what the company does, maybe some of your background. Let's get back to the beef that we started on this with, which is, when do you start investing in the customer, right? Because ultimately, if you're just working on the product and you're just working on net new sales, what happens to the guys that you actually sign? And if you basically don't pay attention to them and they start to attrit and leave, you got a hole in the bottom of your bucket, and you're not going to get any traction, and it's super difficult. So I think one of the things I would like to do is kind of maybe start there, is like saying, you don't go off and build this entire huge organization day one. Once you get the first customer, you kind of see some sort of kind of progression in what you're thinking about. So maybe I just let you talk a little bit about it, saying, I've had this kind of myopic approach, because going back to like focus is basically what I'm trying to create with a lot of the startups. But your feedback is dead on, that once you start getting a mass of customers, you really need to start paying attention and making sure that they feel like there's value and that they're getting the support that they really need.
Yeah, and so I've been here for 3 of the 7, or I guess 10 years total. So I've gone back and talked to David and Ray a little bit about the thought process, but I'll just kind of inject how I've continued to grow it from there. I think initially you're doing everything you can. It is all about product and sales, right? You're building the product, trying to get product market fit. You're trying to sell enough of the product to start generating some revenue, ensure that you've got that product market fit. But as you start to stack up those customers, and do you really want your CTO or the one developer maybe you have, or the team of developers that you've got to be handling support calls or building the product, right? So at what point does that start to pull on? Product and sales are still number one at this point in the journey, right? And we can debate when maybe success and support always stays 3, but to your point, you don't want to keep losing customers, because I've been through
it's not a winning strategy.
It's not a good strategy. So, I think just looking at that and really understanding, okay, is it time to have a support specialist and Zendesk and a tool that handles those support calls, right? Get those off the engineering team. There's enough of them there to, have somebody that's dedicated to that, right? And continuing as that builds out and you say, well, okay, now I need 2 support specialists, but I'm also now adding 5 to 10 new customers every month. Can I find somebody that has the skills for technical support and the product knowledge, but then also really understand how to train them and teach them and get them up and running, right? So, support, rolling into that implementation, that onboarding piece is so important. Those first 90 to 180 days is so critical, which I'm still learning the hard way potentially. Well, not potentially. I have learned the hard way how critical that first year is, right? Especially the first 90 to 180 days, and how critical time to value is to get them up and running, seeing value, right? Every payment that goes by and they're not in the system, I promise you, you're losing ground. So, I don't think there's any perfect answer, right? But starting with support, getting to the point where there's enough onboarding, I would say, is your next. Having somebody that just gets up every single day and gets customers implemented, onboarding, running, using the system to first value, getting the experience to a certain level, they're getting the outcomes, all the reasons that they bought, they're starting to see those things, right, checked off the list. And then eventually into success, what that means for renewals and retention. But another learning I would say, I wish I would have done sooner, is really understanding, like, what does 10% change in gross revenue retention mean, right? Gross retention, net retention, understanding the metrics and how the stack up of all the different revenue streams matter, right? And we had a couple of years ago had an amazing lift from our customers. We got 10% growth from the existing customer base, right? And then market dynamics changed and interest rates and things happened, and that flipped the other way to, we didn't grow 10% of our customers, we shrunk 10%, right? So all that new business, all that other, and even more, right? So last year. So understanding the relationship of that, we focus on revenue, because we have such a wide range of contract values, right? So a logo is not a logo, or a customer is not necessarily a customer when you have one that's worth, $5,000 and one that's worth, 250 grand, right over. So just understanding the metrics, understanding the stack up of the revenue streams and how impactful churn and losing customers can be to your net movement, right? We're all trying to grow and create enterprise value through that annual recurring revenue stream. So I wish I would have spent more time earlier understanding how all that works and understanding the huge impact that both contraction and churn has on, overall growth of the company. So it seems easy now, but
Right.
I was like, man, I wish 2 years ago I would have spent a little bit more time of really, really, truly understanding that. And even when we were getting customer growth, where was that coming from, right? And we'll dive into segmentation in a bit, but like, okay, which segment is growing, which one is not, and understanding where is that coming from, and is that going to continue or not? So anyway,
What about you said something a little bit earlier about just the metrics, and I think like almost all organizations or divisions of a group, you need some metrics to really drive the right behavior and see where there's problems. If you had to say, starting with a simple approach to account management and even support, right? And so even break it up and saying, what are 1 or 2 for support? What are 1 or 2 for onboarding? What are 1 or 2 for kind of customer success that you would really start to like or encourage people to look at, right? Because I think as soon as you start doing this, you want to be able to measure a little bit about what you're doing so you understand, am I doing it well? Am I not doing it well?
So I think, metrics is key. Really having something measurable is so critical. And I think at one point we got just way too many metrics to focus on, and we've dialed it really back to gross revenue retention. It's also called gross dollar retention. So you start with say $100 at the beginning of the period. At the end, you have 90 left. You have a gross revenue retention of 90%. That's such a critical one, because it takes into account the customers that have left, but also the customers that have shrunk, right? So, what did you start with? What did you end with is super critical there. Net revenue retention, as you start to move in, or if you have a model where customers can grow through user seats, we charge by the unit. So if our customers grow, we grow, right? Aligned incentives, super important. We always want to drive our customers to be successful because we're successful with them, right? So, gross revenue retention, net revenue retention, are super important from a customer perspective. If they're growing, if they're being successful, if you're retaining them, super good measures. I've been through different phases in my career of service centers and service support, and I've seen picking the wrong metrics drive the wrong behaviors in support, right? Like first resolution time, right? Or, time to resolve, or the first resolution quality metric, how quickly it can drive the wrong behavior. So in support, we focus on customer sat, right? And we have built a support function. It was here before I started, but 98 to 99% every month of customers that are giving us thumbs up, you did a great job on this ticket, right? So we look at others leading indicators for that, but customer experience as measured by customer sat that's why they exist, right? And we
So is that
spend a lot of
binary?
time.
Is it either really up or down, or is it like a 1 through 10?
No, it's binary. Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Okay.
In past lives, I've done 1 through 5, and the 3s are neutral, and you do a good job with this interaction. So I think that has been a good guiding light for us. If you got to take a little bit of extra time to really solve their problem or make sure you solve their problem, I would rather have you ask one more question, right, and really deliver the experience versus, oh, I can't. I'm at my time. I got to move to the next ticket or chat.
Sure.
So I think, those other ones are important. We have to have an affordable service, right? I can't have 100, support specialists to do, 2 tickets a day sort of thing. But, right tooling, right types of things. But that customer experience as measured by customer satisfaction is job one there. And we're always in this, I always talk to them of we're always sort of balancing that experience. Think about a teeter-totter, teaching them to fish and giving them a great experience, right? We want to have great help center articles if they can self-serve, right? If they want to chat with a live agent, they can. If they just want to put in a ticket and we'll get back to them later, they can. So kind of meeting them where they're at too is important. Or I want to talk to a customer support manager or a customer success manager and have them help me figure out this hard business problem, right? Maybe bosses asked me to improve this number by 20%. Not really sure. So later on, when you introduce those customer success managers, that's kind of the vision I paint to my team is I want that maintenance coordinator to think of you or Property Meld when they're challenged to do something new in their business, right? It's not just click this, do this, set up this workflow filter. It's not just app configuration. Ideally, we understand their business. We understand how they can solve their hard problems with what we do. That consultative piece, that's kind of the ultimate there, right? So support handles, I need to reset my password, this is not working, those sort of technical challenges within the application. But then customer success, as you introduce them later, how do they become that consultative, resource for you, to help solve hard business problems?
What about their onboarding? Like what is onboarding and how do you measure the success of that?
There's definitely time to value, right? Our first milestone is resident invite. So get the Tesla out of the garage. We need you to invite your residents, your vendors, right? Use the system, right? We do that in 2 weeks now, right? From the time they have their launch call, they do some training, invite their vendors and residents and start using the system. And then we have frequent touch points after that. We've evolved this year into really looking at customer success as measured by the outcomes they're getting in their business. as well as the experience. So customer success is customer outcomes plus customer experience. And we focus on four things early. Are the residents engaged? Are the residents in the system? Are they getting good communication? But really sort of key business outcomes that they should see in their maintenance operation, right? The reasons why they bought in the first place, but then also how are they feeling about it? And for too long, I got focused on the analytical side of it, of just if they're getting all the right numbers and the metrics, then they're going to be happy and they'll never leave us. And Ray challenged me
Not
all
as
the
simple
time.
as
We're like,
that. Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
How do they feel?
Yeah.
I've seen bad metrics, but they think we're the best thing, right? The best partner, the best app, whatever. They feel that experience side of it. So we've really spent a lot of time this year of trying to surface those outcome metrics and experience metrics to the onboarding managers or success managers to make sure not only the things that they bought for we put in their success plan, but how are they doing overall compared to their peers, compared to this part of the journey. We're still kind of refining and learning that, but that's definitely critical, right? If they really believe in you, believe in the product, believe in what you're doing, they're happy, right? I'm happy to be a Meld customer. That buys you some equity, that buys you a few missteps, maybe some outcomes. It buys you, I think, some patience. If they're
Sure.
still repair speeds maybe a little bit slower, the residence sat is still down a little bit. If they feel like you're the right partner, they're happy about the service, just buys you a lot of equity in that relationship. So
What about
trying
even
to,
going upstream even further? I think a number of startups, and even we had this problem at Concur, just going from service or sales to service, right? Where it's like,
mm,
especially in a startup, I think you have a tendency to maybe oversell, right?
yeah,
Like the features are coming, right? Like this is going to work,
yeah,
and you do some hand wavy things, and then you say this guy's going to go implement for you, and sometimes that can be difficult to set expectations properly, to be honest about the value they're going to get in the time frame.
yeah,
And so I don't think you guys have this problem at Property Meld, but you can see where it can be an issue. And so, are there any kind of best practices or things that you think really work well to manage expectations and make sure that basically whoever's selling the deal and whoever's implementing the deal, there's a good transition of the domain expertise, maybe the discovery work that they've done, and the
yeah.
expectations are kind of in line with what they're going to get and how quickly they're going to get to value?
Yeah, there's so Nick Mehta published probably 12 years ago 10 laws of customer success. And one of those laws is create an integrated journey between sales and CS. And
Yeah,
I think that is such a good law, and it's an iterative thing, right? And what you need to drive that collaboration and really making sure that all the information that we've learned in the sale is condensed, handed off to the onboarding manager. We're setting the right expectations through the sale, but there's always going to be something post sale that they thought they heard or they thought they read, or we also need to teach those onboarding managers sort of objection handling, right? You can't No product is perfect, right? So
yeah,
the mindset is super critical of really, again, why did they buy? What are the important problems they're trying to solve? Bringing them back to those, right? Instead of, I like to call it, don't get drug into the feature swamp, right? Well, I
right.
want this
Yeah,
report, or I want this button to be green, right? Okay, well, what are we trying to do, right? Because we talked about you're trying to drive these business outcomes, and that's what I really want you to do. So we call it MAP, right? Can you get back to a mutually agreed upon point and help them be successful, right?
sure.
Because if you can't do that, there's always going to be something again in the product that's not 100%, but you have to be that partner and help them get back to why they bought in the first place and then go solve those problems. So I think that's something, and it takes a little bit of assertiveness, right? You have to be able to be like, I'm not going to just, let us go down this path where I know it leads to. Let's map back. Let's get back on track. I'm going to make sure that you're successful. When we haven't done that, regardless of the notes or the handoff or any of that, we 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 lost a lot of customers, right? So
Yeah, and I think
integrated
maybe we can
journey,
put even a finer point on this. I mean, I just think like, they bought for an ROI. They bought
yeah,
for a reason that they were going to save money.
yeah,
And I think that and I think in a lot of cases, all the feature functionality isn't as important as the reason they bought. And so kind of understanding that and orienting how can I get you to that value as quickly as possible is really important. And that journey may mean like the 3 implementations I have all come in with slightly different expectations about why they bought. And I think good people from an implementation standpoint understand that, and they can basically have a talk track to help them get there. And they're not talking about a bunch of features that they didn't really weren't nearly as valuable as the kind of the key reason that they bought for.
And I think there's very much a psychology piece just to tag on to
That's
that,
true.
right? So especially with our smaller customers, a lot of them buy on emotion and sort of justify with ROI too, right? So if we
Mhm.
don't manage the emotion side of it too, right, and keep them excited, show them some wins, as they go through this journey, then they sort of sink into this fear of failure and this bad mindset too, right? So definitely delivering on ROI, but paying attention to the detractors, just the psychology of that change is super important as well, right? If you've gone
Yeah.
through a 12, 18 month, 20, I mean, at Northrop, we spent 3 years buying ServiceNow, right? By the time we finally inked the deal, it was like, okay, right, we're going. We've done all the stuff. We know why we're doing it, right? Let's go. If you got these SMB sales cycles that are 7 to 14 days, there's also a lot of emotion involved with that, right? So if you
It's true.
don't get them up to running, you don't get them starting to see and feel, again, even with ROI, sometimes we found that that emotional component is so important. You got to get them up and running quickly because they see that $400 bill come through and they haven't even
Yeah.
used it yet. It's such a
Yeah.
like just deflator, right?
Yeah.
So I think balancing both for the ROI, absolutely, but being just cognizant and pay attention to that emotional piece, of the change. And you may have one person that is just not bought in, and that could be the reason why it doesn't go, or they don't renew, or they want to get out early. So that's
That's a
that's
really good
something
point.
I've had to learn.
Yeah.
I've
And
super analytical, logical, like here's what the numbers say, here's what the metrics. At the end of the day, they're still human beings, and we're all
that's right.
flawed emotional creatures, right, that are trying to be successful. And you're rocking their world in many cases, right? This is a
It's
tool
true.
that they knew how to use, and
Change
now
management.
change management's huge, and the
Yeah.
psychology of that change, I did not put enough stock in that early, and I've again learned some hard lessons because of it. So
Well, let's
learn
pivot
from
there a
me,
little bit.
everyone, everybody that's listening. Learn from me.
Yeah,
Humans, it's
that's right.
humans.
There's emotion.
There
So
is.
maybe kind of building on that a little bit, Aaron. I think maybe this is a good pivot to kind of segmentation, right? And maybe what I'd love to do is maybe talk a little bit about what an SMB profile looks like for you versus what kind of a mid-market customer looks like from you. And maybe pick, let's not make this too complicated. Maybe pick 3 or 4 different characteristics. Maybe, the door size, the level of complexity, I mean, there's a couple of
Yeah.
things here that I think start to drive what the offering or the support that they really need.
Yeah.
And then it starts to inform how your team actually engages and gives them value.
So so our journey has been just starting with small to medium sized business. We just set a door threshold of less than 2,500 is this, right? So that's probably $40,000 annual contract value, right? Just pick wherever the demarcation is and keep it simple, right? Small, large. I would say that as you start to get larger organizations that have multiple layers, right? You're not just talking to the broker owner of the company and selling to them, implementing to them, right? Now you're talking to the director of maintenance, and then the VP of whatever, and then the COO. And those larger, more complicated organizations tend to just have longer sales cycles and more complicated implementations, onboardings. There's just a lot more to think about, to understand. Loss of a champion can be really critical in the large organizations if you haven't built that at multiple layers. So if you start there, understand it. We started with smaller customers and kind of grew into the larger ones. But the smaller ones, it's so critical. Again, time to value, understanding the emotion of the change, understanding not just who your champion is, but who's going to be the detractor that could potentially blow this up, right? If I don't kind of win them over early, is it going to be the accountant potentially that we didn't spend enough time with helping them understand what changes in their business. They're not really even part of the maintenance department, but they're basically dependents, right? And if I
Sure.
mess up billing and mess with their financials, that's going to be a problem that we're
Yeah.
probably going to have a hard time recovering from, right? So again, I think smaller organizations, time to value is super critical. Understanding those potential detractors, but you can't spend 40 hours, on those smaller contract values too, right? So then you get to the point where the smaller ones, how much time does it take to get them up to speed, right? Maybe then bust that SMB up into two segments, kind of a small and large there, and really start to tailor within that, right? So that's been our journey as we started, small to medium sized business, large ones. Then we've segmented both of those into as you do more and more of them, you start to see the patterns emerge, right? So, this size to this size, you just need more time, right? It's more complexity. The accounting departments are larger, all those things. So just start simple and then decompose from there. If you start with too many segments, then you have too many different processes. You have to teach people way too many different things. They will just be overwhelmed. So, again, I like the analogy from the product development world of the MVP. Like, start with the skateboard, right? Then build the bicycle, and then build the motorcycle, and then build the car if you even need the car, right? If the motorcycle is good enough, then
All
stop
good.
there until you need the car. But really start with the simple minimum viable sets of things and build on from there. Because if you build the car, doesn't have any wheels, there's no windshield, and you're missing a bunch of stuff, it's probably not going to be successful. So just continue to build and iterate on whatever you do. I think is something I learned in other roles, but in startup land, it has to be that way, right? You have to start simple and build.
So I guess maybe kind of building on what you're talking about there, I think you've seen in kind of even your SMB that account management or customer success can be kind of one to many, right?
Yeah,
Where you're trying to find ways to educate them. When they have a problem, they have a named account, they're going to go talk to somebody.
yep,
But when you're trying to talk about a new feature, or you're talking about somebody that's had success, that is really kind of one to many. And I think a characteristic of a lot of those kind of customers are for the most part, their implementations are very, very similar, right?
yep,
They're very cut and dry, and when you talk about something as a best practice, it does kind of apply to the majority of your kind of customers in that SMB. If you
yep,
move up into some of the larger ones, their customizations, their integrations, their configurations can be different. Their goals can be different. Their scale can be different. Their mixture of single family and multifamily can be different. And
yep,
therefore, a lot of the communication, a lot of the investment, a lot of the consultative nature needs to be one to one. And so, I don't know if you tentatively believe, like, I think you believe in that, like, fundamentally. I don't know if you have any, clarifications or, more clarity you can provide on that. But I think that's super important to realize. There's going to be part of your audience that you can't just like say, I'm going to talk to every single one of these about a new feature that comes out. I'm going to do a webinar that gets in. I'm going to talk about,
yeah,
turns and apartments, versus somebody else that's trying to do it has way more complexity, and you're gonna have to walk them through and say, what does this mean for your implementation?
yeah. I think it's definitely something. I mean, and just agree with all of that. I would say be careful too of the smaller ones. Can sometimes be the most demanding because they're wearing so many different hats. They
Yep.
can act, if you're not careful, they can begin to chew up a disproportionate amount of hours for support onboarding success. So really setting, what that onboarding process looks like, what support looks like, what the webinars are, what the academies are, right? That one to many training and coaching, because if you're not careful, you can have a pretty small account that you're spending so many hours on that you'll never recover. So, if you start to feel that or sense that or hear that from your teams, it's probably another good time to really segment a little bit further, but setting that expectation early on, even in the sales process of like, this is what your onboarding is going to look like. Here's about how much time you're going to have, and then manage that appropriately. But then the next group up, you may need to spend 2, 3, 4x more time with them because of their complexities, because of the uniqueness of the business, because of the uniqueness of whatever. And that's okay, right? If you've got $1,000 customer and $100 customer, right? You have 1 hour to spend, right? I talk to my staff all the time about this of like, all of our customers are important, but if you've got 1 hour to spend, what do you think is more impactful, right?
Yeah.
Is that customer less important than the big? No, all customers are important, but you can't spend the same amount of time with $1,000 customers, $100 customers. So
Sure.
how do we scale? How do we 10x? How do we 1 to 10 on the $100 customers? Just making up values there, but again, trying to drive all customers are important. Every dollar of revenue is important, but you're going to get to a point where you're going to have to start making those decisions. I can do it by I'm only going to assign $100 customers to a certain CSM, but early on, you're going to maybe have one CSM that has to cover all different sizes, right?
Yep.
So if I have one to spend, where am I going to spend it, right? What's the most impact, right? And I think even just getting down to that idea helps them, make better decisions on where they can spend their time. Maybe what needs to go back to support. Maybe what they need to tell them to go to the next webinar coming up on next Tuesday to talk about vendor adoption or things like that, right? So very much a fine line of all customers are important, but we also have limited resources. So be thoughtful on where you're going to go spend that time.
Yeah.
So.
You kind of brought up early in the conversation that, and we talked about this like from the top, sales is important in growing. And so I think if you think about this as a maturity curve, right, you think about getting your customer, once you have customers, you do support, you got the onboarding component of it. Now you've just layered on support. As you get more products to sell, that job from a customer success standpoint gets a little bit more complicated, right? You're starting to think about, how do I increase the net value of this customer? And in a lot of cases, that means selling to the existing base. And I heard something the other day that I thought was kind of funny. This is like trying to hug somebody while picking their pocket, right? Like, and so it's difficult to basically be there from a satisfaction perspective, and then also have the skill sets to talk to them about what's next, right? And so you are in this kind of consultative sale where you're trying to say, hey, look, I know where you're trying to go as an organization. We think we have other tools that will help you get there, but they're going to come at a cost. And so maybe talk to me a little bit about that maturity, right? You've recently kind of gone through that where you've built the bottom component of it where we're here to support and satisfy the customer. Now we're trying to add selling to the existing base because now we have products to do that and cross sell and ultimately to make that customer more valuable.
Yeah, that's been an interesting journey because I think, again, back to mindset of the team, my job is to hug the customer. Right? I like that, kind of like that analogy. It's like, now you're going to pick their pocket. It's like, okay, nope, time out. That's not it. That's not what we're trying to do. Back to Meta's 10 laws of customer success. He says that constantly drive more value or expect churn, right? So can we flip the script a little bit to, actually getting that customer expand and use more of the product and upgrade and maybe pay more is going to help us with retention, right? Because if we're not constantly driving value, whether that's expansion, if that's adoption within their current capabilities or expanding into different tiers, upgrades, add-ons, right? And I think there's importance in both, right? I am using more of my current offering. That's good too, right? But also, if I can demonstrate how this add-on, this additional feature, this next tier, whatever, can provide you even more value, right? Solve more problems, drive more efficiency in your business, then that's going to help with retention too, right? So we've been struggling with this of it's two different things, right? There's expansion through upsell and cross sell, and I got to sell now, and then there's retention, and I think it's the same, right? It's back to understanding, discovering what they're trying to do, identifying solutions, and then helping them see the value and closing the sale. Whether that's, here, use this new capability. Why are you not using projects in our world to do turns and rentals and do? That's not an upsell. You're not going to pay more, but I know if you do that or turn on your integration or do these things that you already have access to, you're going to be a higher probability of retaining, right? Renewing your contract. I can take that to the next level and say, oh, by the way, here's this analytics capability that's going to help you get to the reason why things are not working way faster, right? And help you see things coming before you get to that financial review. And now you missed all your financial numbers and those types of things, right? We're going to give you the leading indicators to get ahead of that on this week, not 2 weeks after the close of the month. Those things, that's where we need to get. So I heard this concept of retention through expansion, and I've been trying to refine that, but I think it's the same, right? I think if you're not driving more value with your customer and they get to that renewal, they're going to be like, why do I need this? I can go save money, go back to the other thing I used to do. It's good enough, right?
Sure.
So they have to get to year one, especially that first renewal, if you're on an annual contract, and be like, I cannot do this without this capability, right?
Sure.
And that's the mindset you're going for. And if it's true, then you've got a long-term customer that's probably ready to expand. If you don't, then you're probably going to be fighting for them to stay with
To renewal time.
Yep. Yep.
So maybe let's close out with a couple more questions. Just maybe like, you've done a fair amount of recruiting in this space. You've had some turnover in your team over time as the job has changed. What would you say if you're somebody's looking to build this organization for themselves? What do you look for in candidates? I know that's hard, but I do think there are some aspects of this that are probably somewhat generic across all customer success candidates. And so I'm curious about what you've learned from your experience and what you would recommend.
Yeah, and I think the evolution, thinking back from the first one to the ones that we have now, especially as we start to move into that expansion idea. But right now, I think the ability to learn fast, right, is super important, right? You're going to have to learn the product, you're going to have to learn the customer, you have to learn the industry, and then you have to be able to sort of connect all those dots for a customer quickly, to help them solve their problems. I think being very sensing emotionally, right? Is there somebody that is actively detracting, right? Do I have somebody, even if they don't say anything, but I can just tell by their body language that they're not a fan of what we're talking about and doing. And if I don't spend some time with that person, helping them to show and see the value, they're probably going to be the reason why they don't stay with us, right? So I think learning fast, I almost relate it to like sort of an IQ, EQ, right? The sensing emotional piece of it. What else? I think you got to be resilient, right? Whether it's grit or perseverance or resilient, you're going to have customers that come through and cancel, who are super upset about something. The system was down for 2 days, right? Or, something happened and really impacted their business, that you have to be resilient, help them cope and manage through that hard time, and then start to build back up, with, I call them relationship bank accounts, right? If you want to keep building in, right, and there's going to be stuff that happens, right? You're making those deposits because something's bad is going to happen. And I had a mentor that used to always tell me that when the stuff hits the fan, you want to make sure you have a good positive balance. Otherwise, it's going to be a rocky conflict, bankrupt. You're probably done, right? So close up shop. The other one I've come to appreciate more, and our head of customer success is really good at this. Sometimes you have to be assertive and kind of tell them what needs to happen, right? You're the expert. You talk to hundreds and hundreds of customers across all kinds of different sizes and scales, and be that sort of consultative perspective. Like, this is the best way to do it. We talk to the best operators in the country, and I'm not one, but I talk to all the best across, and here's really the best way to do it. And be a little bit assertive in that way, because a lot of times they want that expertise. They're not exactly sure. So I think that's another one that I've really come to see as important. If you're just passive, you're agreeable, you're kind of along for the ride with them, they're going to lead you to a place that they're not going to be successful. And it's on you, because you should have seen that coming and help them sort of steer up out of the ditch and back onto the road and take a left turn here, because that's the best way. We have lots and lots of customers that have taken that path and have been successful at your size. So I need to have the gumption and, to be able to just look you in the eye and say, this is the best way to do it. If there's something unique, we can work through that, but this is the way, right? You go over there, you're going to end up in the swamp and flooded, and you don't want that, right? So that's kind of where we're at today. It's definitely evolving. I think we talked about the sales piece of it, discovery, and how do you inject some of those things into the CSM and their
Yep.
ability to do that discovery, right? It's just discovery, problem solving, and be able to close, right? Even if I'm
Right.
closing a deal, or just this is the best way to do that, right?
Yep. And get
Closing
them
on the
there.
idea or process, right? Sometimes. So if you
So
don't
maybe
have
talk to
that
me a
in,
little bit about the comp structure. I'm assuming you guys have kind of a 70% base and a 30% variable. I think this is somewhat, kind of standard for a lot of CSMs. Maybe
yeah.
talk to me a little bit about how that variable is split up.
Mm.
Again, you've got kind of two objectives that you got to go do. And so maybe talk to me about like how you break that up and really measure it.
Yeah, there's another quote, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. Charlie Munger, before he passed, used to, that really resonated with me. And I had been through several iterations of comp plans now where I had way too many metrics to start and the team really didn't know what to focus on, and tried to simplify that down to the two, right? Your job is to retain customers and to expand customers. So 70 base, 20% on a quarterly bonus that is relative to their retention targets, and then they have about 10% if they're on targets for quota for upsell, is that monthly commission. So 20, 10, 20% quarterly, 10% on a monthly commission that's related to that upsell expansion piece. Um, Again, even thinking through that of retention through expansion, is that even driving this mindset of those are two different things, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think what's most important there is think of your comp plans like the product or an evolving, right? Continue to learn and iterate on it. It's, you want to make sure and give them plenty of advance notice before you just change their compensation.
Yeah.
That
Totally.
that's not something you do right. Oh, next month or next quarter, here's what's going to happen, right? You got to give them enough lead time to help them through the change, but it's definitely something as the business changes, as your organization changes, you need to evolve and constantly think about, because it will
It's
drive the
important.
outcomes
Yep.
unequivocally. It will drive
Yep.
behaviors and drive outcomes for those folks, and you want to make sure that they're aligned to where you're trying to go.
So last question for you, Aaron. You've talked a lot about kind of your journey and kind of looking at this, but if you were a founder who's basically going, I've got a handful of customers, I'm starting to get some
Mm.
traction. Maybe I got the first 10, maybe I got the first 15. I'm still doing kind of support and dev and stuff. What would you give me as a recommendation to like where to start in the whole this?
I would stand up a really solid support function to start, right? Get a good tool. We use Zendesk, kind of best in class. Leverage those partners to help you accelerate, right? Don't try to find the
Reinvent the wheel.
cheapest. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. Go with one that's been doing it, that's a thought leader that can help you stand it up, get it running, continue to evolve. Um, I definitely start there, and then get just maniacally focused on that customer experience piece, and try to feed back as much information to the product team and to the sales team, right? You're going to have a lot of interactions with the customer base. How do you actively, how are the voice of the customer concept, right? How do you relay the stuff that's important and sort of filter out the stuff that's not, right? If you're just an order taker and just passing through requests, you're going to miss out on some potentially really big jobs to be done that could lead to some innovations, that could lead to some really important things, right? So, but start with support, start with a good system. You probably have time to implement it. You got one person. It's way easier to start with something good and train from there than have 4 or 5 later and try to,
Yeah,
you
totally.
get so integrated and there's so many connections and stuff that you build up over time. So I think one of the geniuses that Ray and David did here is pick the best tools, partner with the best providers. Don't try to shortchange that, because it will accelerate your stand up of that function. And then just pick the one or two things that you're going to be focused on and drive those numbers, right? Look at them all the time, report on them at the highest levels, talk to the team about it. Don't focus on 10 things, just one or two, and get super focused on what metrics, what numbers are the things that you're going to drive and do the best at. So,
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Well, Aaron, this has been good. I mean, we've talked for an hour on this. I think there's a lot of good insight that we've kind of pulled from your experience and going from something that's maybe just getting the first handful of customers to kind of a continuum of kind of growth and how to think about layering on different functions here. So I really appreciate you kind of sharing your experience, maybe some of your trials and tribulations. That's good. Showing a couple scars and saying, don't make these the same mistakes. But I appreciate it. So thank you very much for taking the time today.
Absolutely, Todd. Anytime. I appreciate the opportunity, and it is definitely a journey. So all you founders who are listening to this, just you're gonna fall down, you're gonna stub your toe, just pop back up, learn, and keep going on. Right? I think that's the most critical part. Just those founders, I think they just never give up. Right? They just keep going. Right? It's like
that's right.
You just got to keep going because it's going to be hard, and you got to keep going. So thank you, Todd. I appreciate it.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks, Aaron.
All right.
If you enjoyed the podcast today, please just take a moment to rate it or comment on it for us. This feedback really helps us, and it helps us get the word out to helping other entrepreneurs and founders. Thank you.